Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. It's been a little bit of a roller coaster for Mario Cristobal, the Miami Hurricanes, as it pertains to the 2026 high school recruiting class, where you've seen some monster wins, headlined by a guy like Jackson Cantwell, but at the same time, you've seen some frustrating misses, especially over the last couple of days. You had Calvin Russell go to Syracuse. You had Bryce Perry Wright go to Texas A&M. And I'll start with this. Look, when you are Miami and Mario Cristobal has made it very clear we ain't backing down to nobody on the recruiting trail. Miami's going to take big swings. And when you take big swings for players across the country, you're going to have some big misses. That's what we've seen from Miami. Want to take a step back and really have a couple of different conversations. Number one, where does Miami sit right now from a talent acquisition standpoint? What do we love about the class? What are we concerned about? The second thing, some new names to monitor for Miami in the 2026 cycle. Now, I want to start with this. Where does Miami sit right now? I have two takes. Number one, there are certain aspects of this class that you absolutely love, and I think it's headlined by the offensive line position, which I will continue to get on my soapbox, if you will, and say that's the position you got to get right at the high school ranks. That is the one position that historically is really difficult for programs to address in the transfer portal. And you look at what Miami did in the defensive backroom, like completely revamped it. You look at what you can do at the wide receiver position. You can go address those positions in the portal. That one position that you can is on the offensive line. There are just not a ton of high-end starting caliber offensive linemen that emerge in the portal every single year. And we all know that Mario Cristobal and the Miami Hurricanes, they want to build this program from the line of scrimmage out. The fact that they've really got the offensive line right on the recruiting trail, that's a massive plus. Now, that means there are still some concerns about this 2026 cycle. I think the safety position probably highlights it for many Miami fans who follow this program closely. I'll say this about the safety spot. Yes, it's concerning because you don't really have that bona fide safety prospect yet in the class. I think there are some cornerbacks that probably can give you some versatility at the safety position that are already committed to Miami. That's a position I think you can address in the portal relatively easily. The biggest concern for me is the defensive line. And I know Miami is a massive fan of Tyson Bacon, but I look at it and say, hey, you want to be deep along that position. I think it's already probably a thinner position, especially for those big bodies in the middle of the defensive line. I think for many Miami fans who follow this roster and follow this program closely, that's the priority. Like that's a position you feel like Miami needs to get right in 2026 because we've seen it's a really hard position to address in the portal. That's the biggest concern and probably the biggest position that you want to see Miami get right over the next couple of weeks and months. The other conversation I'll get into is we're in this era of high school recruiting where we really care about what the class rankings are. Two things on that note. Number one, if Miami can just kind of hang around that top 10 ranking, which Miami's there right now, as you roll into November, the way Mario closes, but just as importantly, if Miami wins the games they're supposed to win in 2025, and I've been very vocal, I'm a believer in this team going into the 2025 year, I think you're going to see Mario Cristobal have some late class fireworks, probably bump up on the top five, provided that Miami takes care of business on the football field. Look at all the relationships that Miami has built up. I don't think there's a single program that recruits as hard as Miami from a relationship basis. Mario Cristobal knows a lot of these players really well, even if they're committed to other programs. So if Mario Cristobal and Miami take care of business in 2025, get some momentum around this program on the football field, college football playoffs, you're going to see Miami close this class out well, probably push as a top 5 class in the country. But what I would say, secondly, it's not like Miami needs to be a top 5 class at the high school ranks because of how effectively Miami has shown they can be in the transfer portal. There are some other programs I would think a team like Clemson, or a team like Georgia, teams that don't use the portal very often, but also in Georgia's case, like I'll just come out and say it, Georgia does not use the portal really well. They miss a lot in terms of their transfer portal evaluations. Miami's the opposite. One, Miami has shown very clearly that they are comfortable allocating a lot of resources to the transfer portal. But secondly, and probably more importantly, their evaluations have been really good. It gets headlined by a guy like Cam Ward, but you go down the list and you talk about guys like Matt Lee, talk about guys like Zach Carpenter, talk about guys like Damian Martinez. Miami's done a really good job evaluating in the portal as well. So as much as I think we get concerned with, hey, what's the high school recruiting class rankings for Miami? You still want to be a top 10 class in the country, but I don't know if top 3 necessarily matters when you use the portal as effectively as Miami does. We see a bunch of programs use the portal and the high school ranks differently. A million different ways in this era of college football to build a roster. Miami blends the two together relatively well. And so you want to see them kind of routinely land top 10 classes. Doesn't necessarily need to be top 3 or top 5 because of how well Miami does in the portal. Now, I want to get into some of the bigger names that I think Miami needs to gain some traction with over the next couple of days and weeks. Before we get into it, as always, the Miami fans, appreciate you guys. Many of y'all know I have a blast talking this program, especially in the summer months as we get nitty gritty into the roster building, into the recruiting trail. The amount of support y'all continue to show to the boys has been amazing. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into it. And let's start with the two biggest names I think left on Miami's board, Lamar Brown, Derek Cooper. I've been pretty vocal that these are the two names that I think are most important to Miami. Now, which one would you choose? I've been pretty steadfast that it's Lamar Brown. And why is it Lamar Brown? I just don't know. One, he's clearly the best interior defensive lineman that you see in 2026. It's the biggest position of need for Miami in the 2026 cycle. And lastly, you don't find Lamar Browns in the portal. Kind of going back to how we opened this conversation, as good of a football player as I think Derek Cooper is and will be, that's an easier position to address in the portal. And I think Miami feels pretty comfortable about the running backs they have on this roster. Now, the argument for Derek Cooper is this offensive line with Derek Cooper in the backfield over the next couple of years, that's the recipe to have a very, very good rushing attack over the next couple of years. And when you have the ability to run the football on anybody in the country, it allows you to compete at a very high level of the sport. So I understand why Miami fans and why the staff values Derek Cooper the way they do. I just look at Lamar Brown and say, that's the body that Miami needs. Now, here's another interesting conversation. All right, Derek Cooper or Tristan Keys. I'd probably lean Derek Cooper. Now, with Calvin Russell seemingly off the board, and I would be surprised if Miami continues to recruit Calvin Russell very hard, I think you pivot to Tristan Keys. I was always more comfortable, and I'm not trying to spin zone. I'm a Michigan fan, and I wanted Calvin Russell to come to Ann Arbor. I'm not trying to spin zone it. I was pretty vocal that if I was going to pay a lot of money for a wide receiver at the high school ranks, it would have been Tristan Keys. It wouldn't have been Calvin Russell. Now, Calvin Russell got most of the media buzz for Miami because he's a local kid, a legacy kid. Look at Calvin Russell and say, number one, there is some work that needs to be done. Meaning I don't think he's going to be a day one guy like I think Tristan Keys can. More importantly, I'm not super comfortable with the two sports at the collegiate ranks. You have to be special to be a guy that can make it happen at two sports. And you see a lot of guys not really make that happen, especially with the case of Calvin Russell, where he's 6'6", 190, 195. Like, knowing he needs to get himself looking like a little bit more of a Division I football player. Right now, he looks like a basketball player. You want him to look like a little bit more like a football player when you are missing all of winter workouts playing basketball, when you're missing all of spring practice playing basketball. I don't know if that's the kind of player that I want to allocate the amount of resources necessary to land a guy like Calvin Russell. Now, with Calvin Russell, in my opinion, officially off the board, I think you're going to see Miami really push hard for Tristan Keys. If you can land one of Derek Cooper and Tristan Keys, that's kind of the missing piece for this 2026 class on the offensive side of the football, right? You got a quarterback in Darian Coleman, who I know everybody wants to talk about the size. This kid can rip it. Now, if you give him a good run game and you give him some decent, not decent, but good pass catchers, you feel really good about what Darian Coleman can be for Miami over the next couple of years. Derek Cooper, Tristan Keys, land one of them. I feel dang good about Miami's class in 2026 on the offensive side of the football. Now, the defensive side of the football, that's where it feels like there's more wood to chop, specifically on the defensive line. I want to just quickly reference a name that I wouldn't be surprised if Miami circles back to. That's Viliami Moala. Now, it sounds like North Carolina is the team to watch. A little background on this kid. He was committed to the Oregon Ducks. He was going to play his senior year in Eugene. With him decommitting from Oregon, with him transferring to Thompson in Alabama, wouldn't be surprised if Miami maybe circles back to. I guess what I'm saying is, look, North Carolina is the team that has a lot of buzz around this kid. I would not be surprised if Miami circles back to this kid because he's the body that Miami needs in the middle of that defensive line. Let's just be frank about it. Your chances of getting this kid in the fold here exponentially get better. He was going to high school in Eugene, Oregon. He was committed to the Oregon Ducks. Now he's on the East Coast in the state of Alabama, currently uncommitted. Even if North Carolina lands his commitment over the next couple of days, would not be surprised if Miami continues to work on this kid until signing day. 6'3", 340, that true big body that you have in the middle of the defensive line that can do the dirty work against double teams, but also provide you some pass rush juice. In my opinion, you need as many of these bodies as you can. Again, going back to our conversation, Miami tried to add some guys like this in the transfer portal. You can't find them all that much. We'll see if Miami decides to go after him. And then what about safety Tyree Green from Buford? Now, this kid has been penciled into Georgia's class in 2026 for a very long time. Here's the kicker here. Georgia's got 6 guys in the secondary already committed, 4 of them at the safety position. Miami's got 0. And Tyree Green's a guy that I think can play nickel, can play safety, has a lot of man coverage, goes sub-11 in the 100-meter dash, phenomenal instincts, good open field tackler. This is a really good football player that you can use in a lot of different ways in the back end. And Miami needs a kind of guy like this in the 2026 cycle. He is committing on July 12th. It sounds like Miami will be trying to make a push. This is another name that we should probably monitor for Miami in the 2026 cycle, especially if a guy like Blake Stewart ends up going to Clemson like we probably expect him to go to. We'll see how Miami shakes out. I think they will continue to push for James Johnson. I look at it and say Lamar Brown, James Johnson, who's committed to Georgia. On the offensive side of the football, you probably want Derek Cooper or Tristan Keys. Can you get one of them? And on the defensive side, Lamar Brown, James Johnson. Can you land one of them? And if you do land one of those cats, you feel so much better about where Miami sits in the 2026 class, to the point where, look, I don't give a darn about if Miami is the 7th best class in the country or the 9th best class in the country. That doesn't matter. You got to build the roster the right way. You got to get the players that you need to add to your roster in this class. Lamar Brown, James Johnson, they both feel like one of them needs to be in Miami's class in the 2026 cycle. We'll sign out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.